Hi, I'm Susa Hart, and I wanted to talk to you guys today about a path to innovation. So what we're going to be talking about is, like, everybody's always talking about they want to innovate, right? And they throw the word around and we say, okay, we're going to be, innovative and we'll get there. But very few people actually have a process behind that kind of gets them there. And so what I want to share with you today is some of the tips that I've learned in my career in terms of the things you can do and rituals you can implement to actually get you to a state where you can actually get near-term and long-term disruption. So just to give you a little bit about who I am. So I started back in the dinosaur days of technology, the dot-com boom days. And I actually started off as a reporter and hated it. Not because I dislike writing, but I just hated asking people stupid questions like, hi, I understand your brother died. How do you feel? That was really stupid. So I actually then decided that I really wanted to get into technology because I was living in the heart of Silicon Valley, and that's what everybody else was doing. And so I joined Pacific Bell, and I became a programmer and found that in a lot of projects I was getting pulled into doing UI stuff, which back then was, kind of a fledgling art. And so they sent me to Xerox PARC in Palo Alto to learn how to do it formally. And from there, I kind of segued and found myself with the privilege of being able to work with some really, great companies. Like I was at Intuit when they were just, going head to head with Microsoft money. And you say, what the hell is that? And that's because they won. And then I went from there after working a lot of, contract jobs around the valley to E-Trade when they were trying to, go against brick and mortar. And so we don't even think about going into an office these days to trade. We trade online. And a lot of the things that I learned there about their, ideas about how you grow and evolve ideas came from what I learned there. Going forward into the early 2000s, I worked with a number of, startups, including WebEx wasn't quite there, but they were acquired by Cisco like right after I left. And I don't know if you've been in airports and seen these kiosks, like where you can buy. So that was a concept that I worked on from the very beginning, which is really kind of exciting because at that time, no one ever thought that you would stick a credit card in a machine and get a $400 piece of electronics because they thought it would drop. There was all these kinds of things, but there were ways to work through those questions. And we'll talk about some of that today. And then I also worked on another one from the very beginning, which is Cobalto, that was recently acquired by Oracle. And now I'm at ADP. And so the things that I've learned along that way are based in some of these, interesting little icons you see at the bottom: design thinking, lean UX, and the 3-box solution. And we'll talk a little bit about those and how you can leverage them, whether you're a designer, a product owner, a developer, a business owner, or anything, because really design is for everyone. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to kind of get out is that it's really important to innovate. So there are a lot of studies that have done, that have some really good numbers in terms, oops, it didn't go. Okay, there we go. There's some really interesting stats. There's a Harvard study that shows that you can get an ROI of 9,900% for every dollar that you invest. Facebook did a study in 2006 where they looked at a lot of the companies in the NASDAQ, and those that had actually committed to being user-centric actually had a 450% return compared to those that that didn't. And this is in the middle of the big recession. So they got some really good returns during that period. So what happens is that when your experience is right, customers are your best marketing. It doesn't matter what you do and what you say your product does, you'll get those early adopters and everybody else really going for you, and your product will begin to sell itself. There's also some really negative things that happen when your experience is bad. As you can see that a lot of dollars are lost. On average, $243 per customer can be lost to a bad experience. Avon had this really huge bad experience with their website, causing their employees to quit because they were just tired of dealing with the issues around it. And probably from working in development environments, how many times we have to start and stop and start and stop because we start an idea and it doesn't pan out, and then we have to go some other direction. But we're not going in a linear trajectory. We're just kind of like guessing and having a lot of failures. And projects that start and then stop, for example, especially during the waterfall days, are huge. Also, when you get it wrong, your company may not survive. So if you look at the S&P 500, and just think about, well, you may not have been around 50 years ago to think about it, but there's a lot of companies that aren't around. And I want to give you this thought right here, like how many of these were good ideas that almost got there but didn't? And I apologize to anyone who in the room who might work for General Motors or IBM, because I've worked for IBM myself. And it's not that IBM is a failure, it's just that they're not the dominant company that they used to be, and they're not what you think of in terms of being forward thinking with design and innovation anymore. You don't use IBM computers anymore, right? Laptops or anything that comes from them. Obviously Polaroid and the camera industry was hugely impacted by not looking forward. Think about Blockbuster. They could have seen this coming. They could have innovated around it. They could have gotten online. They could have done a lot of things differently, but they really weren't going there. Okay, so one of the things that I really think is important, and people say this, but it's kind of hard to imagine how it happens, but innovation is everyone's job. It's not just the designers. It's not just researchers. It's not lone developers, it's the entire team. And we'll talk a little bit about how you get there and why, so you don't have to really know how to lay out a page to innovate. It's really not about that. So, traditional approaches often fail us when we're trying to talk about innovation. So a lot of times what happens, companies say, okay, we're user-centric, right? So they think, okay, let's get an innovation space, and they get this cool furniture and nothing changes, and they don't get innovation. We hire designers. I know a lot of companies that have hired hundreds of designers, and they're still not there, and they have this thing called the UX maturity scale, and we're not even getting there because hiring people isn't enough. It doesn't do anything because then they just fight each other. People say we're agile, and that's an interesting one, and we'll look a bit deeper into that in just a minute. So, common objections, the reasons why people don't get there: we don't have time. We need to just start coding. We don't have time to really think about what we're doing and who we're doing it for. We'll worry about that stuff later, right? We've got product that we need to get out the door today. What's one of my favorite ones? Design patterns, because everyone thinks that design patterns are the answer, but they're really just a tool you use to implement an experience. They are not the experience. So you can have the best design system, the best design patterns in the world, and it may not change your experience because it has nothing to do with what users are doing and how they need to do them. It's just a way to ensure consistency and to make your jobs easier. Okay. Another complaint, we don't have access to users, and that can be a challenge, but that can be worked around too. And this is one that's really interesting because it ties back to some other things that big companies, or one of the, I would say, warning signals that you're about to be disrupted is you think it's okay. What we have is okay. And that's never okay. It can always be better. Okay, so that was me, operator error. Okay, so one of the things I always like to challenge people to really think about is the Agile Manifesto. It was developed by developers for developers because they needed to be able to be more efficient, and waterfall didn't work because they'd spend like years, maybe a year or two, working on something. By the time you release it, it didn't work. And there was no way to really measure their work really well. So they came up with this manifesto in a vacuum, and I think over this first 10 years of the Agile Manifesto kind of being really popular, designers, started coming in and trying to insert themselves into it. But I think it's a good manifesto and it has a lot of good value. But I think there's some ways we can challenge it, like item by item. For example, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer. Okay, that one's okay. I think that's a little user-centric. You can deliver working software. Okay, I can buy that one too. Build projects. Let me go back. Build projects around motivated individuals. So I have a problem with that one because I really think that we should be empathetic and responsible individuals, responsive to users' needs, not to us. That's saying that we're more important than users, and being responsive to our needs is more important than users. So I think sometimes we have to look at these things and challenge them a little bit because it affects how we talk about what we do and who we're doing it for. Working software is the primary measure of progress. I think a useful experience is more important because working means it checked the box and it does something, but does it do the right thing? Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design. Now that one sounds really good until you think about what is good design. What if it's appropriate design and design that appropriately supports the user's experience? The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. I can take an issue with that one because, I keep doing this. Operator error. Okay, to me, the best architectures and requirements and designs emerge from well-organized teams, not self-organized teams, and here's the reason. So let's say we get a self-organized team and they decide, I think that developers shouldn't check in software. They should just, everybody can check something in. Well, that's kind of what we do on the design side. Anybody can throw in a design. Anybody can throw in a requirement, sometimes under well-organized or self-directed teams. But a well-organized team acknowledges that everybody's got something, some part to play in this process, and everybody has processes that are part of their discipline that are important to acknowledge. So sometimes it can be that I work in a group that has a very content-driven content. We can't just have everybody writing. Writers write the best content, right? We can't have, one person stepping on somebody else's code, and we can't have someone just designing something because they like that pattern. It has to work for users, and we need research, right? So everybody's got a role to play, and I think that that's when they come together and they work together, bringing their unique experiences, and sometimes those experiences aren't really related to, I'm a developer, I'm a designer. Sometimes it's, I happen to be the age group of the people in the application, and I have this perspective to bring. So there's many different attributes, and one of the things that Cooper Design, which is a really good design shop that kind of led the a lot of design thinking, I'm spelling my words today, concepts, said that the best teams are very diverse. And so one of the things I think is really important is you're pulling people of all age groups. You're pulling people from various backgrounds, ethnicities, nationalities, and stuff like that. One of the reasons why we're here, because all those perspectives are representative of the users that you're serving. So think about the team dynamics too and how it relates to innovation. See if I can get this right this time. Okay, so we welcome changing requirements, even late in development. I think that's really good because if something changes, you want to be responsive to it. You don't want to be committed to the wrong thing just because it's late. Business people and developers must work together throughout the project. That's interesting, and I think that's really old school because we used to develop software where we were doing it for certain clients, and then those clients have requirements, and they kind of drive what you're doing instead of saying, well, we have a variety of clients that are all over the place, and we really want to design for them. It's the 80-20 rule, not the 20-80. So I think this one should be users and the Agile team must work together because business is not the user. The most efficient and effective method for conveying information is face-to-face. That's good. But there are caveats, and sometimes not everyone's in the room, so sometimes I think there's a minimum amount of documentation and stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about how to communicate with people who aren't in the room. And Agile processes promote sustainable development. Yeah, they do. Simplicity. I like this one. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done. You're shaking your head, so what do you think about that one?
Yeah, well, because feature surface area creates a ton of drag, right? You have to maintain it.
Yeah.
You have a ton of features that cross-function.
That's true.
There's all sorts of interactions. So if you talk to the users and figure out what they don't need, the more you can slim down that feature set but still solve their problems, the better off you are.
That is great, as long as that's what people are thinking, because sometimes it means that we don't do something because we don't think users need it. And so I think the maximum amount required, did I do that again? Sorry. Okay, the maximum amount required to learn is essential as well. So we don't need to just get something out and keep it lean. We also need to have enough to learn from. And at regular intervals, the team reflects. I think that is awesome because that allows that well-organized team to get a little bit better. I'll stay away from those parts of the slides because that was really horrible. No animations, okay? So the other thing that I think that contributes to it is roadmaps. A lot of times we get into road mapping before we've really thought about the problems that we need to solve. We don't lead with research because we don't think we have time getting back to that first one. So it's interesting that if you can get some research done before you roadmap, then you're going to be building the right things. A lot of times we build roadmap because we have this list of features that we want to check off, but they have no relationship to the user's journey and what they're trying to do. So I wonder, do you feel that in your organization that your users and their needs are reflected in your rituals and processes right now? Are they at the center of it, or are they kind of on the periphery? Okay. So anyway, there's this formula for innovation. I would play this video, but we don't have quite the setup that I wanted to share with you. So I'll tell you a little bit about what Scott Cook said. And Scott Cook was the co-founder and chairman of Intuit. And he talks a lot about the business difference that was made in their business was to really, design by experiment. To really put things out there, figure out if it works, get feedback, and get it back. So we all talk about that now. But, obviously made a huge impact on Intuit's business and their ability to not only take over a giant, which is Microsoft, but actually to sustain and actually become a leader in what people think is innovative software. That formula really kind of gets us down to really understanding that user experience is not magic, it's not art, it's science. It really comes from having a strategy, from really doing the research, to kind of experimenting with possibilities, not getting stuck, wondering what would the outcome be. You actually run an experiment, a controlled experiment with controlled conditions, and you validate those outcomes. And what you get in the end of the day is innovation. It starts with design thinking, which is kind of the embodiment of all these things. The empathize part is where we go out and do the research, we define, we ideate, we prototype and test. And this is actually a long-standing process, and it's very popular within design community, and it's kind of something that business doesn't always embrace because it doesn't really know how to ingest these processes into what it does. But if you kind of look at what design thinking does, it actually kind of lines up really neatly with roles: researcher, product, the agile team, as opposed to a designer when you're talking about ideating. Prototyping can be a designer developer, and the agile team is what really should be involved in actively making sure that everything we put out makes sense, is used, is validated. And it all kind of starts with understanding the user's journey, and that's the research part that not only informs the roadmap, but informs everything that this process does. You have to meet some users. And if you think about it, and this is where the rub is, and this is where it gets challenging, is that the agile team is often making decisions with people they haven't met. There are a lot of places where we have researchers, like companies that have hired researchers, and then sometimes they're the first ones to get let go. When you think about it, they're a key part of the strategy and understanding what you should be building and how you should be building it, and does it make sense? And so I think that's really important. Get some, if you can't have researchers, then at least identify what your users are doing and what the minimum requirement that they need is in your product. You can leverage SMEs. And I do have a word of warning about SMEs, because SMEs oftentimes represent one person and one person's experience. I think they're good as a good start, but they should not be counted upon for the entirety of representing a user population, just like one person doesn't represent another. Find the pain points and really understand what they are and try to solve them. And then the most important one is learn what delights users, because delighted users are those enthusiastic users that love your product and are your best marketing. So it comes full circle. So this is an example of a journey. It can be as simple as this. Obviously, I'm not going to put up anything that's proprietary. But if you look at it, I'm talking about the user. I'm not talking about a group of features. And think about all of the feature requirements that you've seen, the roadmaps and things that are not saying what the user's doing. They're talking about the features that the user's using. You have to flip the verbiage around to talk about the user if you really want to talk about solving their problems, because it won't show up if you're just talking about features. One thing that I really like to do is to blow that out and really kind of segment each step of their journey and talk about, for example, where are we seeing friction in that journey? Friction being like where they're experiencing problems or where their needs aren't being met, because those are opportunities for you to solve problems. But the business isn't in the business of just solving user problems. They're in the business of solving user problems to benefit the business and to make money. So what I like to do is align that with the business goals. So the business goals may be, for example, that we want to sell a product but we want to sell it in this vertical because we know we can't make money over there. So it would be nice if we make sure that for each stage, we're not only aligning the user's needs and goals and friction with the business goals, because we're in the business of making money and continuing to be around. So it's really kind of interesting when you can lay it out like this. It makes it easy to talk to the whole team so everybody understands the real problems that we want to solve, and that everyone gets alignment, and we don't have like these flying monkeys running around, just kind of like with their own agendas, kind of deterring and distracting you for the problems that you really need to be solving. Telling stories. So there's actually research that says that parts of your brain light up when someone tells a story. So if I was to tell you about users' needs just in terms of, a list, that's not as powerful if I said, hey, I went to the store, I touched the kiosk, it hurt my finger, and I jumped back and then they gave me $5 to make it better. You remember that story, as opposed to the fact that the key was broken and I walked away or something like that. You really kind of have to tell stories that actually make it easy for people to not only understand what users are going through, but to also kind of empathize with what they're going through. And those stories can come in the form of storyboards. My team actually consists of a lot of people with, photography and video and other kinds of backgrounds. Sometimes we tell stories. Sometimes we do things like, I think we got a request for a proposal from, I think it was Amazon, and it came in the form of a press release. And I found that really powerful, because then you can tell the story about what would it mean to the company if we successfully released this product and the stock went up and boom, 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 all this stuff happened. And what happens is it gets, senior leadership excited about why we want to do this, because that's what's meaningful to the business. So another story that we tell often is with data sheets. We do mock data sheets. Like, what would it be like if we were selling this product and you looked at it and you saw that it's going to do all these things? Now, we haven't shown you a screen or anything, and it only took us an hour to write the data sheet or write the press release, particularly if you have like journalists on my team who can write really fast. We test that with users, and we find out that, this resonates with them. And we also find that these tools are really good and good tools for letting the whole team understand what are we doing and why are we doing it and why is it important, because we're telling stories and people get stories. Okay, so that gets into sharing information. So it's, even though we're agile and we don't like to document things, we do briefs. They're kind of like the typical creative brief that you might use at an agency. And the goal of the brief is just to describe what it is that we want to have happen. That first statement, that overview, is probably almost an agile epic statement that just says at a high level, what is it that we want to accomplish with this effort? We identify the stakeholders because they sometimes fly in and then they kind of get us running off track. So we want to know who they are so that we can make sure that they bought into this and that they support it, and that as we're going along, they continue to support it instead of killing the idea down the road. And another thing that we like to do is, all businesses just about have day-to-day business. You need to get stuff out the door because you want people to pay for it. That's a distraction to innovation, because innovation really wants to take its time and it wants to think long term, and it takes a long while to get there. It takes some effort to get there. So what I have my teams do is, and it falls into a 3-box solution, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, where we identify, like, where are we today? What do we have to ship tomorrow? And then we identify box 2, which is the incremental innovation, which says somewhere between here and our goal, this is where we can be. And then we do the concept car, box 3. What this allows us to do is to say, okay, how do we validate that this is a good place to go? So we're able to put prototypes out maybe of the near term and the long term and test those and understand that we're going somewhere valuable. And then as we release, we can start to test to see how close we are to getting there. So we're incrementally proving that, reducing the risk, and also giving people on the team that North Star that they can see and understand that, hey, we're moving in the right direction. We know where you're trying to go. And I know a lot of developers don't like to hear me say this, but sometimes you want them to know that, because invariably what happens, and it happens a lot with startups, you may start to build something The designers, the product owners all know what that is, but they never told architect. Architect has no idea that you're about to do something. They architect the system in a certain way, and then a year from now you have to refactor because they had no clue that you were incrementally going there. So having the concept car at least opens up the conversation. So when they start to make decisions that close opportunities, then you can have a conversation about it. How much risk is it if I accommodate this? Because they'll know. They're part of this conversation. The other thing that this document also is kind of like a centralized place where you can go to for everything. So whatever assumptions that we made as we're going from step to step, we can link to those research reports, which are very lean, few pages, not 40. We can link to the designs. We can, have this as the place to have the conversation so that any person can come to the team and see in one page what's going on, so that as we evolve and as we change, we're changing in lockstep together. Any questions before I go on? Cool, thanks. Another thing I like to do is, and I talked a little bit about how we make videos and other kinds of things to share. We share what we learned in research the same way. Because what's most important is that the entire team understands users in the same way, but not everybody can go out into the world and sit with users and do contextual inquiry for a week or so. Sometimes you have to proxy for that. And so what we like to do is curate stories, whether they're written, whether they're video, and share them. And some of the ways in which it's most effective to share them is, kind of on an ongoing basis, maybe every quarter, whatever you think is most important for the whole team to understand so that you understand and see users the same way, put those stories out. It doesn't take a lot of effort, particularly if you've been, documenting things as you go along. I alluded a little earlier to the 3-box thing, and it's not something I made up. There actually is a book, and it is a really interesting read, and it talks about how large organizations can bring innovation in. There was another one that I didn't actually mention here, and it's called Stella Save the Farm, and it talks a little bit about how you can get, how people make mistakes, for example, expecting people who are shipping day-to-day products sometimes who are being measured on getting that product out the door quickly and most efficiently are probably not the ones you want to have innovating. You got to come up with ways to make it work so that everybody gets rewarded for innovation, and you have to make sure that people who are working those sprints and getting things out the door, especially if you have continuous deployment, that they're getting rewarded for taking the time and the effort to innovate. So back to that one concept that I talked about where you want to have a North Star. I think the easiest way I could think of describing it is, let's say that you were starting in New York and you said that, I think I want to go to California because it's warm, but you think you're going to San Francisco. So along the way, you go down one road and you'll think about, okay, now where am I going, and am I getting warmer or is it getting colder, right? Because I think if you only thought about getting to San Francisco without thinking incrementally about all the journeys along the way and learning more about what it really means to get to California, you'd find out that that's not the place to go. We call them tourists in San Francisco because when tourists come, they have to buy these San Francisco shirts because it's cold. It is not warm. You want to go to LA. So, right? So really think about not having a North Star that you're really committed to. Think about it as a learning journey that you're going to find out as you go along, and be open not to going where you thought you were going in the beginning. Don't hold on to those initial ideas. So I'm curious, by show of hands, how many people in this team who work on in this room who work on development teams think everybody understands what your North Star is? Do you have a clear vision of that? Do you think the rest of the team does? You think they do? That's good. That's really good. Step 7, or tip number 7, as I should say, is you want to look at the entire experience. One of the things that I often do when I'm working on an application is to, and I've had to block things out. I didn't realize it wasn't going to show up this badly, but there are actually rows and things, and these are capabilities. Like as a user, I can do X, I can do Y. And what you really need to do, and if you're going to be innovating to make sure that you're not creating too many gaps in your experience, is really just catalog them and like give them a ranking. I think this is an X, it's not there. I think it's an orange X, I think it's in progress, or or green, that we're good to go. And as you're innovating, because you're innovating incrementally, you have to be constantly aware of the state of or the health of your application, and whether you're creating debt and gaps in the experience as you're going along. Part of that is starting with the MVP, and so that document that didn't display too well, and I apologize for that, will help you figure out what your minimum viable product is, because you never want to go past that. You always want to start with, what is that journey, and what are those minimum capabilities that users need to go through in order to get there. All right? So if you recall that previous journey that we showed, obviously being able to, in this example, view the catalog, see the details, select an option, add it to the cart, and buy it, is my critical path. It's my MVP, because without that, I have no value at the end. But viewing similar products and viewing details, that's an enhancement. That should come later, after I've learned and perfected this first view and gotten feedback from real users on it, not just my opinion. One of the things I think that slows people down when it comes to innovation is, fear of making decisions. And so one of the things I always like to say is that it's about 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. We can come up with a lot of ideas, and a lot of times this gets teams blocked because people have differing ideas. So have a hypothesis, A, hypothesis B, and then just prove them out, and the best one wins, because it's really not about what individual team members believe, it's about what users want. And so this will help you get to that, and then you can just explore all the ideas in the world, because they're not personal anymore. You're just throwing them out in the world and just proving them and letting users, say who wins. Now this one, I think, is probably unexpected for a lot of people. We are entering into a phase where we have Siri and all kinds of applications and objects that talk to us. And over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of banter within the UX community about what the future of interactions is, and it is going more in that direction than things we can read. In fact, maybe someday we won't even touch anything, just it's on us somewhere, right? So UX writing is hugely important at the moment, because it's something that we just don't concentrate a lot on, and it can make or break your experience, particularly if you're trying to innovate. So a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to change the interactions when maybe they just need to change the copy. Think about these right here. These are real, right? The first one, I don't think that that's probably innovative. It probably is doing some function that's probably very valid, but it doesn't present itself that way, and it's because of the words that are being used. And in the second example, I've always wondered, what does cancel do? And it always stops me. Why not just say yes or no? Is this shipping to the US or Canada? Maybe there's a more direct way to answer that. These are nice interactions. These are innovative, because this one gives you a clear call to action. You don't have to think twice. You just do it, right? This one's anticipating your needs. This one is reinforcing the brand. These are all very pleasant interactions that very well could have been the other one underneath in the code, but on the front end, they make a hugely different experience for users. How do you get there? Well, I tell my teams to write a script. Imagine that the computer is sitting across you from a desk, and it's asking you questions. And it's saying, like, what do you want today? Well, I want to check my checking account. Which account do you want to check? There's ways of doing it that help, first of all, expose, what is it that's important to ask of the user? You may not use that specific script, but it helps you think about these things and what keywords are surfacing as you're asking, or as you're having this dialogue. If you do it with a partner, it's really amazing. So I had a designer come to me with a design that took, he worked on it for a month, and it was, he presented it twice in peer review and did not get it, did not get what he was doing. And so we sat down and did a script, and I realized that his interaction was absolutely on point. The words were throwing me off. It was something like, we was a machine learning thing. It was a really cool application. So that we analyzed all this data, and we're presenting it back to you. We want to know if it's right. And he had words like confirm and stuff like that. But really, after we went through the script, it was like, we analyzed your data and found these. Do you want to confirm that they're correct? Just let us know, yes or no. And so the buttons were yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. It was easy. I didn't have to think about it because it's just the way you talk. It's the way you think. So anything else is kind of an abstract. The other thing that I think is really important is, identifying the key words. Those words that came out in our script actually were his call to action buttons. And it made everything so easy. And then test the experience when you're done. And then get someone to edit it, because not everybody writes the same. Some people, it's just not their thing. So if you have someone on your team who is kind of like an English nerd head or something like that, let them help, because it makes a huge difference. Some of the tips I have for you is just, and this one that a lot of people except writers don't know, because writers tend to write to style guides, and this is in every style guide just about, write in the present voice. People, particularly who don't have English as a first language, have a hard time with things that are future tense and past tense. You need present tense. I did it now. You want to avoid that passive voice where you don't know who did what to whom. And there's a big difference between the flat tire was changed by Terry, then Terry changed the flat tire. Be consistent. Eliminate unnecessary words like have, had, and if you go through and look at a sentence and just say, does the meaning change if I eliminate this word? The fewer words, the easier it is to read, the less cognitive load on you. Avoid jargon and techno speak, because we are all very technical.
Just going to ask a question on the avoiding passive voice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you use Grammarly or...
Yeah, some of my people do, yeah.
Yeah, so for me personally, I'm constantly getting accused of using passive voice in Grammarly. I don't know if other people have the same problem, but if they do, I'm curious if you know or have any thoughts on why that seems to be more of a predominant thing that people tend to do over more of an active.
I don't know. It's funny because I was having a conversation with someone, and I don't know if it comes from academia because it makes you sound smarter. I don't know. I really don't know, and there's probably research around it. But it is kind of like a standard practice that it's a lot easier to read. And, because, like I said, who did what to whom. Because the object is always the center of the sentence. And what that person or thing did and its actions on somebody else are clearer that way. Otherwise, you have to guess, like from the first one, who changed the flat tire? Because, you don't get that until the very end. One thing that, because we're in an industry that we understand a lot of things that are specific to technology, we need to avoid that techno speak. And one thing that a lot of times people will do is repeat for clarity. And the problem with that is if you say it a second time and it's the same thing, then someone stops and they compare the two and you've stopped their reading. You want them to keep reading. You want this to be natural in the flow. So write the way you talk is really the easiest thing. I'm running short on time, so I'm going to skip this because I was going to ask you guys to think about what would that dialogue be if you were to rewrite this in a way that seemed natural. It's an interesting exercise, and if we have time, we can come back to it at the very end. Encourage feedback within your team, but feedback sometimes comes with a caveat. Everyone who's giving you feedback should also try to explain why it is that they think what you've done needs to be different, because it's the reason that's important, not the fact that it's wrong. Getting back to the whole thing about the voice, that's a good explanation. It's like when you're giving feedback, first of all, I think it's really hard for a lot of people to accept, but it's critical to the process. First of all, start with something positive. This looks really good. It's a good start, and then from there, talk about the reasons why you think, I'm having a hard time understanding this sentence, and I think it's because of this, right? That way it's not personal. It's, it's not about you, and it's not about the entirety of it, so always try to balance that, but make sure that, what I try to do is make sure that everyone in the room has at least one thing to say. Find something to say, because the more you practice giving feedback, the more you could take it, and vice versa. Validate outcomes. It's extremely important to the process, because just because we put something out and we like it doesn't mean everybody else does, and the only way you can tell is with numbers. Either testing and not usability testing, because usability testing is just about where are people failing, and you only need about 5 to 7 because you're just looking for failures. Get that quantitative data as well. And the easiest way to do that is to have the team think about what questions do we have about this release. What do we want to track in order to learn to prove success? because sometimes you need to put code snippets in. So you really need to think about that as you're going through and as you're building it. And what I like to do is have a ritual where at the end of the sprint, we confirm those questions, make sure the code snippet's in, working sure that everything is working so we can track the success, and then decide how long you're going to run this experiment. Is it going to be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, a month? Sorry, we did that. 4 weeks is a month. A year, whatever. Decide how long you're going to run it and make sure it's in the calendar to come back and look at those results and really analyze them and use them as a moment where you decide, are we going to pivot? Are we done with this? Are we going to continue on? Having a UX vision helps, because a lot of times people have in their mind, well, I want to do it like Intuit did it, I want to do it like this, or I want to do it like that. Come up with some idea of what you want the experience to be. Kind of like, for example, if I want to get in a car, I want the seats to be cushy. I want this. Describe what that is. And if you don't have any proof that your vision is right, just come up with a hypothesis. So we often do that, look and see what's going on in the industry, the Siri example that I mentioned, come up with some idea, and then start to see if that starts to get you results. But at least it gets everyone thinking about the same way to solve problems. One of the ones that my team is working on right now, and it's a good example of one of ours, is that the application delivers insights, not data. And where that comes from is we're doing a payroll application. So at the end of the day, if my system was sitting across from me and I say at the end of the day, how's payroll? I don't want them throwing numbers at me. I want them to say, well, at the end of the day, here's the insights. It's $40,000 over, and I think you should look at this. So that gives my team a vision. When we're trying to solve problems, the last word we want to hear is reports and drilling down into the data. What we want to see is insights. And so that's a part of our UX vision, and that helps everyone think about it in the same way, and that's a branded experience at that point because it's consistent and it's purposeful. So along the way, acknowledge that you're going to have UX debt, and that gets back to kind of looking at your success, looking at your metrics, and fixing things, not just letting them lie, because they are part of the experience. And if you don't have time to manage it all, then maybe you should lessen what you have in the application. Is it being used? Getting back to quantitative data. If someone's not using something, maybe it should be removed so that you have the time and attention to pay attention to what's important. And make sure that your stories are stories, because a lot of times what happens is we get a little sloppy with Agile and we start writing prescriptive stories. So for example, if you look at the second one, add a button to send the product description link to another person, tells me it's going to be a link, doesn't give me the latitude to do it another way. And it means that there's something that you're telling me specifically to do. But if you look at the first one, as a customer, I can share product information with a friend so I can get needed information before I buy. Now you've opened up the world for me to solve that problem in a way that might be innovative and better for the user. Could just be, as I'm selecting a product, maybe we ask them, hey, you want a second opinion? You want to ask Joe again? So, to recap. Innovate or lose market share. It's really critical in this industry. Traditional approaches may make developers or certain clients more successful, but kind of look at the approach and make sure that the user is the object of why you're doing a certain process, and if it has any outcomes directly related to users. Perform innovation rituals to control risk, encourage exploration, and keep the focus on users and their needs. And with that, any questions? Yeah. Sure, there's nothing proprietary in them. I can do that.
And from my standpoint, like when you say users,
Yeah.
I think most people think users as external. My users are internal.
They're still users.
Application is actually for my business.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit harder to innovate because they kind of drive the products that we build for them. Like I can't just say, I would like to do it too, but if I see something that will help them be more efficient, it's hard to get buy-in from that standpoint.
Well, their buy-in is their feedback to you. They're telling you what they want, and it might be different than what you think they need, but it gets back to, if the user is the center of the reason why you're doing it, then watch them how they do their work. Ask them to articulate the journey, kind of get that confirmed with other people on the team, even though they're internal. I've got half of my users are internal as well. And they are no different than customers. The only difference is the metrics that you use to determine that you're successful or not is not dollars. For them, it's productivity. And that's why it's extremely important, because if they're not productive, they're costing the company money, not gaining money. Yeah.
So at our company, which is a bit larger, we have delivery teams, and innovation, of course, is the big buzzword, especially now, which is lovely. But they always say that, you know, the developers are empowered to take their 20%, but the developers have provided me, the project manager, with the feedback that they won't really innovate or act on any type of true innovation until it's like, kind of like, I don't know, provided to them. So an opportunity to work on an innovative product or something cool. So I was curious if you have any suggestions around ways to be able to pull together teams to be empowered to be able to innovate. So
well, see, I don't think innovation is a separate thing. Innovation is what you do every day. And whether you're working on a maintenance application, or it is what you should be thinking about in the context of everything. And so that's where getting development involved and understanding the pain points, because usually developers are reluctant to give you what you want because either it's not in the roadmap because we didn't do the research and put it there, or because they don't understand why it's important. And a lot of times they don't. It's because they don't know users. I mean, I have developers who have never seen a user expressing opinions. And that's where that empathy, I didn't call it the empathy program here, but we have a developer empathy program where we share those user pain points and stuff with them so they can see it. I actually had a moment, and I hope that I'm not doing anything about the company, but we had this one process where users were going outside of the system to get something done, and developers had no idea. And when they actually watched someone do it, it was amazing how energetic they got around wanting to solve that problem because they saw it themselves for the first time, because they never get to see. And it's kind of expensive to get developers out in the field, so sometimes you have to bring the field to them. Do a video, do stories, whatever you have to do to make sure that they're buying into the fact that it's not an innovation ghetto. This is the work. And it's just that you want to do it in an innovative way. Yeah.
So first off, great presentation.
Thank you.
In part 6, you mentioned a book that I didn't catch the name of.
Okay, there was How Stella Saved the Farm, which is really weird because it looks like a children's book, and it really is a children's story about the animals on the farm who wanted to take over the farm and do it, but they needed to innovate in order to survive. And so it's really a real deep story when you get into it. And then the other is the 3-box solution. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Or we just.
Our user group is very difficult to reach. They're spread out very geographically, so it's hard to do a lot of research. What we've been doing is kind of research through proxy. But what we're running into is that our user group is very diverse, but our proxies are not. So our proxies are mostly like and stuff. Interact with them. Do you have any suggestions on how we can kind of get the AEs to have less filtering on their end? What we're running into is a lot of what I like to call design by bling.
Yeah.
Where they just think, oh, this is going to be the shiniest idea ever. You should put it in.
Experiment and test. Like, for example, a problem I was faced with is that I was asked to put more visual stuff, bling, on the page, to make it look better, right? But to me, that was just distracting from what was important. The message. What do you want them to do? What's the outcome, So I think that's a good test for an experiment. Like, do the one with the bling, do the one without. Maybe get on user testing or something like that. See if you can get, some testing with large bodies of users. So if you can't get research in the beginning, again, have a hypothesis, and then find it, prove it with data. And so if you can get them to subscribe to something like that, where you can actually get tens of users or thousands of users, the data will show up with just the A/B test that you don't have to necessarily, or deploy it in the wild, set up an A/B test, one version versus the other. But always experiment, because even with our best knowledge and experience, sometimes we're wrong, because things change over time. And sometimes we're just wrong,
So I work at a company called GitLab, and we ship on the 22nd of every single month without fail.
Yeah.
I'm very new to product management. I've been doing it about 2 or 3 months now.
Uh-huh.
It's often hard to kind of balance that concept of driving towards a vision whilst also shipping something very, very minimal.
Yeah.
And kind of trying to find the time for all of the things, like there's a slide very close at the beginning where it's like, we don't have time for this, wow, the other. But in the context of all that, what's the best advice you could give to somebody?
So as someone who's lived on both sides, I've done product management and I've done UX. The jobs are almost the same. They're just different fidelities. Like, you're the kind of like the orchestrator of everybody, and you've got this really deep stack of responsibilities. I think what you should probably do is partner with UX to do some of that for you, because that's in their camp to help with what I ask my designers to do is, do that capability matrix for product, because they're worried about integration and other kinds of things. So I would see if you can partner with UX and research. So, we have research stories long before the roadmap gets written, and those stories then become tasks to the epic, and then then we get the design stories and stuff like that. So leverage your UX team to do all of those things, because I'm sure they're probably more than happy to do something more than just wireframes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
How do you foster that experiment mindset culture?
That's controversial right now, because there's some saying, the UX community has been working really hard trying to get companies to give UX a seat at the table and to be doing the culture. I think it's got to be a top-down and a ground-up thing. You really need to find a champion high up who will start to think about, like, how can we change how people are getting rewarded? Not for just putting garbage out, but also putting out good quality stuff, and to give the resources and the time. But I think you also have to, from the ground up, start proving things. So one of the things I didn't talk about today is that, if you're going to start doing this from the ground up, start a UX dashboard or something that shows your metrics, because people are metrics driven. They will buy the metrics. If you say, we got, conversions up or whatever, just like any other metrics that they're tracking, put some number to it. And that's when you get into this validation phase. You can take those validation numbers and use those to show, hey, this is making a difference. And then go to Harvard Business Review and get those articles that I talked about, because there's lots of articles on what it means to the bottom line for companies. Cool. Thank you.